Tonight's class is going to be going over the residential purchase contract. It may seem a little redundant that I'm going to read everything line by line, but I do feel that you get more out of it if you read the contract over and over. And after each section, I'll go over some situations that I may have come in contact with, if that's the right wording, or situations that may have presented themselves, I guess, in a transaction. So let's go ahead and get started. The first page of the residential purchase contract is just a checklist. This is reminding the buyer that you are entering into a legally binding agreement. It talks about making sure that they read the entire contract before they sign it. It's always good practice to send this to your client, possibly in your first meeting with them. Maybe bring a blank copy of it or email it to them in a PDF so that they can read through it before you actually send them a contract to sign. That's always great practice. Making sure that they understand what the residential seller's property disclosure is and why it's very important. The fact that this is information that comes directly from the seller. And if there's any blank spaces that we, as an agent, we should be previewing the seller disclosure before sending it to our clients for signature, so that if there are any blank spaces or unanswered questions, we ask ahead of time, and then relay that information back to the buyer. But the seller should always complete it in full. Making sure that they review the inspection paragraph, which is also Section A of the contract. Whatever is important to the buyer should be important to you. So if it's important to them, then they should have it inspected. You always want to make sure that they get a home inspector to go through the home. If the AC is important to them, maybe scheduling an additional inspection of just the AC unit. If mold is important to them, having a mold test done. Keep in mind, though, that most contracts only have a 10-day inspection period. And if you do get a mold inspection done, that typically takes anywhere from 3 to 4 weeks to get done. And they're usually scheduled out. So, you might have to extend your inspection period. So please keep that in mind. Pest inspector, that is for termites. That's typically done with the general home inspection. And in Arizona, we all know it's not a matter of if you get them, it's a matter of when you get them. If it has a pool, you want to definitely have a pool inspection done. Some inspectors do a general overview of the pool equipment, but if it's important to the client, then you may want to reach out to an actual pool company and have them come inspect everything. And then, of course, a roof inspection. Verifying the square footage. Most MLS plano sheets or detail sheets are going to list what the square footage of a home is and how they came up with that square footage, whether it was a county assessor, whether it was the owner, etc. If square footage is important to your buyer, definitely want to verify that. Also verifying if the property is on sewer or septic. Very, very important. Take note that most county islands are actually going to be on septic. So just note the area where your subject property is, and know, like, older homes are going to typically be on septic systems. For those that are joining late, I'm just on the front cover page, so you really haven't missed anything. Let's go ahead and continue. You want to confirm your ability to obtain insurance, not like we, but the buyer. The buyer wants to confirm their ability to obtain insurance and insurability of the property during the inspection period with your insurance agent. Apply for the home loan. Of course, per the contract, we have to have a pre-qualification form before we go out and even show houses. So the fact that that's stating that they have 10 days to get their lenders items, that that is true. A lot of lenders can give them a pre-qual based on just having a general conversation with them, but you do want to make sure that you get an LSU prior to that 10 days, if that is the fact, because you want to make sure that the lender has actually viewed all of the documents and that they do qualify to purchase a home. After you've gotten a contract accepted and title's been opened, title will send out a title commitment. Make sure you're advising the buyer to read that title commitment. There are hyperlinks inside that document once emailed to you and your clients, such as the HOA covenants and any kind of HOA documents as far as fees and regulations, things like that. So CCNRs. So just make sure that your client is reading through that, because once that is sent and it's been accepted or received by the client, and I should just say whenever it's sent, then that is their 10-day period to review any HOA documents. If it is important to your client, make sure that they read through the CCNR. Some clients don't want to be in a community that only allows 2 dogs. Maybe they have 4 dogs, something like that. If it states in the CCNRs that they have a 2-pet max and they are outside of that maximum amount of pets, for example, then they are not going to be approved to live there, or they're going to have to get rid of some dogs. And the only reason why I bring that up is because I've actually had that happen, where I had a client who had 5 dogs and they were moving into a master plan community. They read through the CCNRs, and we asked for a exception to be made, and because some of them were assisted, but the HOA did not approve our exception. So they unfortunately had to cancel. And yeah, so just make sure that if it's important to them, that they read through it. Conduct a thorough pre-closing walkthrough. The reason why you do want to do a walkthrough anywhere from 5 to 3 days prior to closing is because that is your last chance to say something. So if you had items on a BINSR, which is a buyer inspection notice, and the seller response that the seller was supposed to correct, and they hadn't corrected, this is your opportunity to call it out. So let's say, for example, you had an item on the BINSR, the seller didn't correct it, you do your final walkthrough, you notice it hasn't been corrected. The final walkthrough form has a section that states that you disapprove of the property, and for this reason, you send that over to the opposing agent, otherwise the seller's agent, because we're representing the buyer at this point. That is their cure notice. So when you deliver that final walkthrough form to the seller's agent, stating that, hey, we did our final walkthrough and you did not do all the items, this is what still needs to be done. They've got 3 days from receipt or sending of that document to get it done, or they will be in breach of contract. When you first initially have a buyer client, we now have to have an agreement, which is the buyer broker agreement. At that point, you should also be giving them a copy, just a blank PDF copy of the buyer's advisory. Email that, or bring them a blank copy, depending on if you meet in person or if you are doing everything virtual. Just email them a PDF of that, because that is going to be their best friend through the buying process. I always make sure that my clients understand the importance of this form, and I even have them sign it, even though it is not a required document from ProSmart. It just helps take the liability off of me, because I have provided it to my clients, and I have stated, if something is important to you, there's going to be resources in this document for you to do your own research. Remember, you are urged to consult with an attorney, inspectors, and experts of your choice in any area of interest or concern in the transaction. Be cautious about verbal representation, advertising claims, and information contained in a listing. Verify anything that is important to you. And here's a little warning about wire fraud. It is real, it is out there, and I've had a situation where the buyer had $50,000 taken within a matter of seconds. So I always tell my clients, beware of wiring instructions sent via email. Cyber criminals may hack email accounts and send emails with fake wiring instructions. Always independently confirm wiring instructions prior to wiring any money. And I always say verbally, pick up the phone, call title, and verify it. Do not email or transmit documents that show bank account numbers or personal identification information. So again, this is just a checklist for the buyer. Now, this document should never be sent with your offer. And the reason why is because if your client checks this and they didn't actually do it and they cancel, but they say, hey, I checked this and I knew I had to do it, but I didn't do it. It just, it takes what's the right word? You know what? It doesn't matter. Don't send it with your offer. Leave it off. Because if they didn't do it, they already said they did it. Yeah. Okay, moving on. Page 1 of the residential purchase contract. And like I said, I'm going to be reading this line by line. You're going to get information out of this and you're going to learn something new. As many times as I have read it, I always learn something new. It might seem redundant and that like, why do I need to sit here for this? But trust me, it helps you understand the contract. And we as professionals, as realtors, we have to know the contract inside and out. Okay, line 1, buyer. The buyer's name, this should come from the pre-qual. So if you have a pre-qualification form sent by a lender, you take the name off of that. So that will go there. The seller's name, this is what is shown on the tax records. So in Flex MLS, let's say this is our subject property. Come over here to Monsoon, click on that, and here is the legal owner of that property. If it states that it's in a trust, you put it in the trust. It's whatever this says right here. So that will go here. Most of this information on line 5, 6, and 7 will auto-populate because of how you transferred the information from the MLS to transaction desk. But you still need to verify it. So just verify the property address is correct, verify the assessor's number, city, county, zip, and legal description. If any of this information is incorrect or missing, once again, you can find that in the Monsoon. Here's the legal description. The assessor's number is right here. And of course, the address. Line 10, this is the full purchase price of what your client is willing to pay. So let's say they are willing to pay $500,000 for a home. Earnest money. While earnest money in the state of Arizona is not required, it is recommended. This is the skin in the game. How much money is your client willing to lose in the event that they do not move forward with the purchase of this home, assuming they have exhausted all of their contingencies? And I will talk about that. So typically it's 1% of the purchase price. It can be less and it can be more. If it's less, just know that some sellers may balk at that and they may not accept your client's offer because it's just not strong enough for them. Where if it's more than 1%, a seller may look at it and go, wow, they're really serious about purchasing my home. I'm going to accept their offer. I usually will put this in to be paid within 48 hours of contract acceptance. This auto-populated from my buyer template that we did in our previous class. If they're pulling from maybe a 401k, something like that, I can edit this and put within 72 hours or 3 business days, whatever it might be. But as long as it's clearly stated, and let your buyer know that this is an important time frame of the contract. The earnest deposit has to be submitted immediately or within 48 hours per my contract, the way I write it up. Line 12 is the additional funds to be paid at close of escrow. If it's a finance deal, this is just the remainder of their down payment. Their down payment can, really depends on their loan type. Conventional can be as low as 3%. FHA is as low as 3.5%, but they can always put down more. So just make sure you are talking with your lender and you are confirming the amount that they are putting down. Okay. So let's just say we're putting down 10%, just so my math is easier. And line 13, this number here should match or be less than what your pre-qualification form states, because this is going to be the loan amount. So my pre-qualification from the lender should state that my loan amount is not to exceed $450,000. And then I'll have to go back to my template and make sure that wording is there. But by a new conventional loan, this is going to be by whatever loan type it is, by a new FHA, by a new VA, whatever kind of loan it's going to be. Earnest money is in the form of, and you check one of these three. Again, if your template's done, it'll auto check. Are they going to pay with a personal check? Are they going to pay with wire transfer? Are they going to pay other, which is what I like? And I write wire transfer or personal check, because that way I'm covered either way, no matter how they pay. Upon acceptance of this offer, the earnest money, if any, will be deposited with the escrow company. If this is an all-cash sale, a letter of credit or a source of funds from a financial institution documenting the availability of funds to close escrow is attached here too. So if you've got an offer and they're saying they're paying cash, do not accept this offer until you have proof of funds. Close of escrow. Close of escrow, COE, shall occur when the deed is recorded at the appropriate county recorder's office. Buyer and seller shall comply with all terms and conditions of this contract, execute and deliver to escrow company all closing documents, and perform all other acts necessary in efficient time to allow close of escrow to occur on whatever date. Typical close of escrows are anywhere from 30 to 45 days. Some companies, such as Starboard Financial, if you need a quick closing, they can get it done. But make sure you're asking the lender if you need a quick closing to make sure they can do it. Close of escrow should never be on a Monday, and it should never be on a Friday. Why? Because if it's on a Friday and something happens, now you can't close till Monday. And if you have a Monday closing, there's a lot of holidays are on Monday. So now you can't close till Tuesday. So rule of thumb or good practice, Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday should be a close of escrow date. If escrow company or recorder's office is closed on the close of escrow date, close of escrow shall occur on the next day that both are open for business. Buyers shall, an escrow, close of escrow can never occur on the weekend, FYI. Buyer shall deliver to escrow company a cashier's check, wired funds, or other immediately available funds to pay any down payment, additional deposits, or buyer closing costs, and instruct the lender, if applicable, to deliver immediately available funds to escrow company in a sufficient amount and in sufficient time to allow close of escrow to occur on the close of escrow date. Buyer acknowledges that failure to pay the required closing funds by the scheduled close of escrow, if not cured after a cure notice is delivered pursuant to Section A, shall be construed as a material breach of this contract, and the earnest money shall be subject to forfeiture. So basically what this is saying is, if they don't have enough funds to close, that's not the seller's problem. And more than likely the buyer will put their money up for forfeiture. All funds are to be in U.S. currency. The seller shall deliver possession, occupancy, existing keys, or means to operate all locks, mailbox, security system, alarms, and all common area facilities to buyer at close of escrow or another predetermined date. Brokers recommend that the parties seek independent counsel from insurance, legal, tax, and accounting professionals regarding the risk of pre-possession and post-possession of the premises. There's a lot of legal concerns when you give pre-possession. Post-possession is, it's better. Like, there's still liability there where the seller stays in the home after you've closed. But for a seller to allow a buyer to take possession before they've even closed on the house, there's so many liabilities. Our broker, they allow it. It's been done, but it is definitely a practice not to, you don't want to do it. It has been done, but there's just a lot of liabilities. I guess as long as all parties understand, and it's agreed upon, you can do it, but pre-possession is very rare. Post-possession, it's more common. Okay, this is an important part of the contract. So when you're typing the offer, just make sure you pay special attention to 36, 37, and 38. This is any addendum or addenda that's incorporated within the contract. Additional clause, buyer contingency, domestic water well, HOA, lead-based paint, loan assumption, on-site wastewater, which is if they're septic, seller compensation. This is number one now. If you don't check this and you don't send the seller compensation addendum with your offer, your buyer pays your commission. The seller does not have to because they did not agree to it. And even if you send it with your offer, if the seller doesn't sign it, they never agreed to it, so your buyer's on the hook for it. So just make sure that before you send over the Binzer, you have everything confirmed and signed as far as the SCA goes. If it's seller financing, short sale, seller addendum, anything that might be part of the contract, just make sure you check it. And always, always, always triple check this section to make sure you have everything, especially the seller compensation. I cannot stress it enough. This has to be checked. Unless your buyer is, of course, paying your commission, but rarely do they ever do that. It's always going to be on the seller, usually. Any questions so far on page 1 of the residential purchase contract? Okay. Page 2 talks about fixtures and personal property. I am not going to read all of this, but I'll read some of it. For the purpose of this contract, fixtures shall mean property attached, affixed to the premises. Seller agrees that all existing fixtures to the premises, personal property specified herein, and means to operate fixtures like remotes shall convey in the sale, including the following. So built-in appliances, ceiling fans, drapes, window coverings, fireplace, flooring, ovens, garage door remotes, light fixtures, mailboxes, security cameras if they're affixed. If they're not going to stay, they need to tell you that they're not staying. Any kind of speakers. Let's see. Sunscreens, water misting systems, water softeners, unless it's leased, they stay. So just make sure if your seller is not going to, if they're going to take something like the Ring doorbell or whatnot, that needs to be part of the contract, stating that the buyer is aware that the Ring doorbell does not convey, stuff like that. And I'll eventually tell you where to put that in the contract. Line 55 through 62. If your client wants to ask for the refrigerator, washer, and dryer, they need to put it on the contract. Even if it's listed in the MLS as staying, if they don't ask for it, the seller does not have to leave it. So never assume that because it's in the listing on the detail sheet that your client gets it automatically, because they don't. You have to put it in the contract. Furniture, let's say it's a furnished cabin up north that you're selling. Furniture does not go on the contract. That is personal property. That would be done on a separate bill of sale. So just don't put that in this contract. It goes on something else. Additional existing personal property included should not be considered part of the premises and shall be transferred with no monetary value and free and clear of all liens and encumbrances. Leased items shall not be included in the sale. The seller shall deliver notice of all leased items within 3 days after contract acceptance. Buyer shall provide notice of any leased items disapproved within the inspection period or 5 days after receipt of the notice, whichever is later. For example, if there's a leased security system, a leased soft water system, anything like that. Solar systems that are leased, that's kind of a separate issue. That has to be detailed and outlined up front because that does affect the buyer's ability to qualify for a home because that payment has to be made part of their monthly payment and maybe they won't qualify for the house. So definitely just make sure that you know that that is not section or line 65 to 67 is not talking about a solar system. It's completely separate. If this is an all cash sale, section 2 does not apply. So you can skip this entire section. Anything in this section, it does not apply to the buyer. Luckily for you, we're not going to skip this because it's training. So let's talk about financing. Now we will have a class coming up soon where we will have a lender coming in and they will talk about all of the different type of loan programs, just so that we have a better, or you have a better understanding of what each loan type is. And he'll or she will talk about the max seller concession that someone can get based on, if it's a conventional loan, FHA, how much money they're putting down, stuff like that. But you definitely need to understand the basics of financing and you need to understand this section of it because believe it or not, this is very important to the buyer and a timeline in the contract. Pre-qualification, an AAR pre-qualification form is attached here too and incorporated herein by reference. So if you've got a buyer that says, hey, Tina, I want to go out and I want to look at homes. First question I'm going to have is, can you send me your pre-qualification form? Well, I don't have it. Oh, I'm so sorry. I need that before we can go out and look at homes because I'm not going to show you $1 million home because that's what you want to go look for. And you can only qualify for 300,000. I'm not going to waste your time. What I want to say is don't waste my time. Give me a pre-qual, but we have to be professional. Loan contingency. Buyer's obligation to complete the sale is contingent upon buyer obtaining loan approval without prior to documentation conditions no later than 3 days prior to the close of escrow date for the loan described in the AAR loan status update, the LSU form, or the AAR pre-qualification form, whichever is delivered later. So when you start with the buyer, you have the pre-qualification form. Within day or on day 10, after getting under contract, you need to deliver an LSU loan status update to the seller's agent. This is a required document and you need to upload a copy of it to Paperless Pipeline. So if you were not in the habit of getting those, start getting in the habit of it because there's so much information on an LSU that we as agents need to look for, such as, did their gifting change? When I accepted their pre-qual, maybe they didn't need gifting, but now the lender is saying they do need a gift or they are getting a gift. Things like that we need to talk about because we have to let the seller's agent know of any changes. And keep in mind that if a offer is put in at conventional and then the buyer wants to switch to FHA later in the contract, the seller has to approve that before the change is actually made. Because a seller may say, well, maybe it's a condo. Well, this community doesn't accept FHA financing. So, no, I'm not going to allow the switch. You have to go conventional. Just know that before you make any changes to the actual financing type, the seller has to approve it before it's actually done. And you then now need to update them with the pre-qual or a LSU. And if you were following me, they have 3 days prior to close of escrow to actually get approved for the loan. That is correct. You can get all the way through the transaction, the inspection, the appraisal, and maybe they went out and bought a car and now they don't qualify for the home. As long as the lender sends a inability to qualify for a loan, I don't know the term of the contract, the actual form, but the lender will issue that to the seller to title, stating that they cannot qualify for the loan and therefore their earnest deposit is refundable back to the buyer. after, of course, they have tried other avenues, like maybe a different program, things like that. No later than 3 days prior to the close of escrow date, buyer shall either sign all loan documents or deliver to seller or escrow company notice of loan approval without conditions and date of receipt of closing documents from the lender, or deliver to seller or escrow company notice of inability to obtain loan approval without PDT conditions. Unfulfilled loan contingency. This is important, so pay attention. This contract shall be canceled and buyer shall be entitled a return of the earnest money if, after diligent and good faith effort, buyer is unable to obtain loan approval without PTD conditions and delivers notice of inability to obtain loan approval no later than 3 days prior to close of escrow date. If buyer fails to deliver such notice, seller shall may issue a cure notice to buyer as required by Section 7A, and in the event of the buyer's breach, seller shall be entitled to the earnest money pursuant to Section 7B. If prior expiration of any cure period, buyer delivers notice of inability to obtain a loan approval, buyer shall be entitled to the earnest money. Buyer acknowledges that prepaid items paid separately from the earnest money is not refundable. Prepaid items such as home inspection, appraisal. So this goes back to my point of if you do not, here it talks about here. I'll just read. Earnest rate and necessary funds. Buyer agrees that the inability to obtain loan approval due to the failure to lock the interest rate and points by separate written agreement with the lender, or the failure to have the down payment or other funds due from buyer necessary to obtain loan approval without conditions and close this transaction is not an unfulfilled loan contingency. So if they just spent their money and they don't have it anymore, sorry, you're going to forfeit your earnest deposit because you now don't have enough money to close. So make sure that they understand that. Loan status update, otherwise known as the LSU. Again, this needs to be delivered to the seller with, at a minimum, lines 1 through 40 completed, describing the current status of the buyer's proposed loan within 10 days after contract acceptance, and instruct the lender to provide an updated LSU to the brokers and seller upon request. So we are only required to send it on day 10. And we only need one updated LSU for our paperless pipeline file. But if the seller requests it on a weekly or bi-weekly basis, then the lender needs to get it to them. Any questions about page 2 of the residential purchase contract? Perfect. We will probably only get through page 3 for tonight. So just keep in mind, next Thursday is Halloween. We will not be having class next week. So we will start back up the following Thursday on page 4. All right, so loan application. Unless previously completed within 3 days after contract acceptance, buyer shall provide the lender with the buyer's name, income, social security number, premises address, estimate of value of the premises, the mortgage loan amount sought, grant lender permission to access buyer's tri-merge residential credit report. This should have been completed prior because we are required to send a pre-qual with our offer, but sometimes it hasn't been done. But I, as a seller's agent, would never accept an offer without the pre-qual because in the contract, it states that we need to have one. This might be referring to, the lender has just done like a quick little, okay, how much do you make? What's your credit score? Okay, great. Yep. I think based off our conversation, I can give you a pre-qual, but within 3 days after contract acceptance, I'm going to need all your documents to verify what you told me verbally. I think that's more in line of what this is referring to, but I'm not a lender. Loan processing during escrow. Within 10 days after receipt of the loan estimate, the buyer shall provide lender with notice of intent to proceed with the loan transaction in a manner satisfactory to the lender and provide to lender all requested signed disclosures and the documentation listed in the LSU at lines 32 to 35. Buyer agrees to diligently work to obtain the loan and will promptly provide the lender with all additional documentation requested. When we have our class with the lender, we will go over the pre-qual in detail so that you understand, well, what is line 32 and 35? The more we know, the better we look for our clients. That's why we have this detailed training. Okay, type of financing. So when you put in your offer, you do need to note what type of financing it is, and this is going to be based off of the pre-qualification form that you got from the lender. So make sure you refer to that. Is it a conventional FHA, VA, USDA? This is typically down south in like farming areas. Is it a loan assumption? I have never done a loan assumption. I know they're doable, just never done one. And I've only done one seller carryback. If I have a cash offer, again, section 2 does not apply, but I always check this and I put cash, or if I'm working with an investor, I'll put cash/hard money, because that way if they end up going from cash and getting a hard money loan, I'm kind of covered, because I put it in the contract and the seller accepts it. Loan types: all costs of obtaining the loan shall be paid by the buyer unless otherwise provided for herein, meaning it's negotiable. The seller could pay for the buyer's closing cost. Seller concessions, if any, in addition to the other costs seller has agreed to pay herein, seller will credit buyer either a percentage of the purchase price or a flat dollar amount. The seller concessions may be used for any buyer fee, cost, charge, or expenditure to the extent allowed by the buyer's lender. Now, if I'm asking for seller concession, I'm going to go to my lender, even though they've already sent me a pre-qual that said they didn't need seller concession. And I'm going to say, hey, Bryce, because he's my husband and my lender, can you please update the pre-qual and put that my buyer needs 3% in seller concessions, because I want my offer to match my pre-qual. Changes. Buyer shall immediately notify seller of any changes in the loan program, financing terms, or lender described in the pre-qualification form attached hereto or LSU provided within 10 days after contract acceptance, and shall only make any such changes without the prior written consent of seller if such changes do not adversely affect the buyer's ability to obtain loan approval without PTD conditions, increase seller closing costs, or delay close of escrow. Appraisal contingency. Buyer obligation to complete the sale is contingent upon an appraisal of the premises acceptable to the lender for at least the purchase price. If premises fails to appraise for the purchase price, if any appraisal required by the lender, buyer has 5 days after notice of the appraised value to cancel this contract and receive a return of the earnest money, or the appraisal contingency shall be waived unless otherwise prohibited by federal law. You do have to note who pays for the appraisal, and yes, it is negotiable. I always say the buyer should pay for it. Some people like the seller to pay for it, and some people like the seller to pay for it, but they will be reimbursed at close of escrow. And some people like to do that because the buyer, they don't want to pay for the appraisal if they feel it's overvalued. So the seller may agree, okay, I'll go ahead and pay for the appraisal, and if we go to closing, you just reimburse me. That's what that section states. So initial appraisal fee shall be paid by buyer, seller, or other. Split 50-50 would be the other. Make sure you spell that out, 50-50. At the time payment is required by the lender, and it is a non-refundable fee. If the seller is paying the initial appraisal fee, the fee will or will not be applied against seller concessions at close of escrow, if applicable. If buyer's lender requires an updated appraisal prior to close of escrow, it will be performed at the buyer's expense. Any appraisal lender required inspection costs shall be paid by the buyer. Title and escrow. I think I'm gonna review that section so I don't start it and not end it. And then so we'll pick back up. But I wanted to note that we've already covered 2 of our 3 contingencies in the contract. The appraisal contingency is 1. The other contingency is the loan. Sorry, I'm trying to find, oh, right here, the unfulfilled loan contingency or loan contingency. So the buyer is very protected in the residential purchase contract. There are many ways for a buyer to get out of a contract as long as it's within these contingencies. So the loan contingency, you know, even though they are pre-qualified at the front, if something should happen, maybe they're silly and they open credit cards and they go out and buy a new car. If they cannot qualify for the home, maybe interest rates skyrocketed. But again, per this contract, their inability to lock in an interest rate, that is not a reason to get their earnest deposit based on their inability to qualify for the loan. So they need to understand that, and that's right here. But if for some reason they get to day 3 and the lender's like, listen, I've tried all these programs, I've ran them this way, I've ran it that way, I cannot qualify them for this loan. Maybe they lost their job. That is one way for them to get out of the contract. The other way is for the appraisal. If the home does not appraise, a lender is not going to lend them money on a home that doesn't have the value, which is the importance of page 1, line 13. They have to qualify for that amount, for that loan amount. If the appraisal comes back, let's say at 400,000, just for example, I don't have enough money to pay the difference. I don't have an additional 50,000. I'm already putting 50 down for my earnest deposit. I don't have the additional 50. I have the option to either pay the additional 50 and move forward. Well, in this case, it'd be 100, but hopefully you're following me. I don't have the additional money. I can't cover the gap. So if the seller and the buyer cannot agree on a new purchase price, the buyer can choose to cancel the contract and get their earnest deposit back because of the appraisal contingency. So we will cover the 3rd contingency in future classes. But before we end tonight, do you have any questions at all on the cover page 1 or page 2 that we covered tonight? And then part of page 3. Perfect. Thank you so much for coming to class tonight. I greatly appreciate you. Please let me know if there's anything that I can help you with. And always as a reminder, if you have a contract, whether it's a rental, buyer, or seller, you have to open a file in paperless pipeline because our broker has to review those documents within 10 days of getting them. Have a great evening. Have a safe and happy Halloween. I will see you soon.